for January 17th. And this one we have the Glendale City Council, the Housing Authority, and Glendale Successor Agency. So shall we take roll for the council, please?
One moment, Madam Mayor. I'm allowing the computer to load this next meeting.
Okay.
Thank you. Council members Garpetian.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Sinanian. Mayor Devine.
Here. And Housing?
Authority members Devine.
Here.
Garpetian.
Here.
Kelly.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
And Successor Agency.
Sorry, Madam Perozian.
Sorry.
And Chair Sinanian. Thank you. And we have a roll for agency. Agency members Garpetian.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Thank you. Sinanian. Mayor Devine.
Here.
The agenda for the January 17, 2017 joint public meeting of the City Council, Glendale Housing Authority, and Glendale Successor Agency was posted on Thursday, January 12, 2017 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Item before you is Director of Community Development regarding bond expenditure agreement between Glendale Successor Agency, Glendale Housing Authority, and City of Glendale. 1A is Successor Agency resolution approving a bond expenditure agreement for expenditure of excess 2011 bond proceeds between Glendale Successor Agency, Glendale Housing Authority, and City of Glendale. B is a Housing Authority resolution approving a bond expenditure agreement for the expenditure of excess 2011 bond proceeds between Glendale Successor Agency, Glendale Housing Authority, and City of Glendale. C is City Council resolution approving a bond expenditure agreement for expenditure of excess 2011 bond proceeds between Glendale Successor Agency, Glendale Housing Authority, and City of Glendale.
Thank you. Mr. Ochoa?
Yes, ma'am. May it please the assembled bodies that we have. As was foreshadowed by Phil, the agreement that is before you goes a long way in realizing the end of redevelopment, at least in Glendale and as other agencies reaching California. This agreement basically sets out what the relationship would be between all of these parties in the state of California with respect to the 2011 bond proceeds. And so as Phil had indicated just a moment ago, in the ROPS that was just approved, we will be realizing about $1.9 million. That's the 5% that he referenced of non-housing proceeds, and the full $8.4 million, 100% of the housing proceeds from that 2011 bond issue. Once we file that last and final, as Phil had indicated, we would be eligible for another $9.8 million, representing 25% of the full amount. The remaining $27 million would basically sit in abeyance. It's in the city's treasury today. It has been since the bonds were sold, but the state has prohibited us from using those funds for the indentured or the items that were listed in the bond indentures originally. So all of the good public infrastructure, public projects, both housing and non-housing, the monies have sat there in the treasury, and now we're releasing the housing funds, piece of the non-housing funds, but the largest chunk of the non-housing funds, it'll still be under the glass, and we won't be able to touch it, except for one purpose, which would be to pay the bond debt service, which then frees up residual property tax increment revenue that would have otherwise flown to the redevelopment agency, and the pass-through agreements now goes through the taxing entities, of which one is the City of Glendale. So what we are asking from you is to approve the bond agreement, understanding that at some point in the future you will have a policy decision to make as to what to do with those stranded $27 million and change that is there in the city's treasury. Do you do the allowed debt service payments and accelerate the retirement of those bonds and thereby realize some small smattering of property tax increment that would come back to Glendale as one of those taxing entities? Or do you hold on to those $27 million for the balance, the life of the indenture, which I believe goes to 2024, which is not a very long time, and possibly have the ability to try to use those funds at some later date once the debt service has been completed? The risk in doing that, however, is that the state of California, with its insatiable appetite for local funds, could say we are going to sweep those dollars, that those monies will have to go towards something else. And possibly on the good side, it could be they'll require you could use it, but you have to use it for housing. or you can use it, but you have to use it for fill in the blank. That would be the best case scenario versus just simply having them removed by the state somehow, some way. So those are those policy options that are out there in the future, not necessarily the questions before you today. Today is simply approving the agreement that sets up those policy questions for that point in the future. Again, the idea being that as part of the ROPS, you get 100% of the housing funds, which will be part of that housing strategic planning process that we've talked about, 5% of the non-housing funds, and then pursuant to this agreement and the last and final ROPS, another 25%. The question about what to do with that $12 million that will be available to you, non-housing funds, is a question that this council will have to take up, probably not in this coming year's budget, but in the budget year following. We have had a number of projects that I think this council has focused on, parking garages, public paseos, gathering spaces and public investments in open space that looked a certain profile when we had $40 million, $39 million in change in 2011 bond proceeds. Now you're going to have $12 million. So you still have a good sum of money, but not nearly the latitude to spend it in different places in the community. And that probably is a discussion that you will have to have, like I said, in the coming year for the following fiscal year. So if you have any additional questions, Jillian worked on the agreement. Phil can answer those for you, and we'll go forward from there.
I wanted to add, those policy questions do get set up for you, and this agreement will govern those. What it does for you today is it allows the successor agency to give the money to the city, and for that to be considered the expenditure according to the ROPS that you just approved. Otherwise, we have to track that with the Department of Finance over a period of time. We have to spend it in the year. If we don't spend it, we have to ask for it again. There's a lot of administrative work. The Department of Finance has approved some of these agreements before just to say, you know, we know that the city's got to spend it according to the bond documents and the bond indenture. So this agreement will actually be the expenditure that is outlined on the ROPS, and the Department of Finance won't worry about it anymore. That'll be up to the City Council to then use those funds and answer those policy questions that Scott outlined.
So, if I heard you right, that $10 to $12 million that is non-housing, we have to spend it within a year, or?
No, you don't. And that's, if you didn't do this agreement and you listed them on your ROPS, you would have to spend them in a year. Okay. Or if you didn't, then you'd have to explain to the Department of Finance why you didn't, ask for it again on an upcoming
list what
ROPS.
On this agreement?
What's that?
List what on this agreement?
This agreement will avoid all of that. So it'll give the money to the city. The city can decide how to use those funds, and it could be over a period of several years. Okay. You won't have to go back to the Department of Finance.
How about the housing fund?
Same thing.
Okay.
So you can use those $8.4 million how you want on the project that you want, as long as they're bond eligible.
So it
And
makes
for
it
the most part.
just makes it easier for us to administer or make those, use the funds.
It really does. It makes it easier for the Department of Finance and for your staff. And you don't have to see this item again as part of the ROPS. You see the item as in answering those policy questions that the manager had raised. When do you want to spend it? How do you want to spend it? What's your strategy for spending it?
Can we use that 5% without even approval?
We put that 5% on the ROPS today. If the Department of Finance approves that expenditure, then we will give it to the city. We will have expended the money. The city can use it however they want. They don't need to go back to the Department of Finance. But absent the Department of Finance approving that on this ROPS, we could not.
Minor point of clarification. There is a bond spending plan. Essentially what this is doing is transferring these proceeds over to the city for purposes of administration. The redevelopment agency no longer exists. The successor agency doesn't have the authority to spend it or administer it. So the ease in administration, both for the Department of Finance and the successor agency, but it has to be pursuant to the bond spending plan, and that is as outlined in the indenture for certain projects, but it's very broad. So it's not virtually everything, but it's a wide array of things that those proceeds can be used for, as long as it's consistent with the indenture.
Got it.
Just a point of clarification.
Thank you, thank you. Any other comments? Is there a motion for the item?
I'll move it.
Second? Oh, let's do for, yeah, three of them. Successor agency?
Name of the person.
I'll move it. 1A for the successor agency.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Agency members Garpetian,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Sinanian, Mayor Devine.
Yes. Housing Authority, please.
And I'll move 1A for
Thank
the
you.
housing authority.
And a second from Mr. Kelly.
Authority members Devine,
Yes.
Garpetian,
Yes.
Kelly,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Barazian,
Yes.
Chair Sinanian.
And finally, City Council.
I'll move 1C for the city council.
Second.
Roll call.
Council members Garpetian,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
Sinanian, Mayor Devine.
Yes. And with that, do I have a motion for adjournment?
Move to adjourn for council.
Second.
Move to adjourn for successor.
Second.
Move to adjourn for Housing Authority.
Second.
Okay, we are adjourned for all three. Thank you. And thank you.